Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that honestly sounds like it's straight out of science fiction.
Oh, yeah.
AI in the courtroom. And you
Mm,
know what? It's not as far off as you might think.
really?
This tech is already making its way into our justice system.
Well, that's interesting because we actually have brand new guidelines from a pretty respected legal group, the Sedona
Oh,
Conference,
oh.
and they're specifically aimed at judges using AI.
Oh, wow. So these aren't like casual suggestions, right?
Right.
These are guidelines for judges in state and federal courts, right?
Exactly.
Kind of a roadmap for how to use this incredibly powerful tech in such an important area.
And I think what's really important here is that it's not about replacing judges with robots.
Yeah, that's what everybody jumps to.
Right, which is, I think, a lot of people's
I'm talking
first.
about judges banging the gavel.
Yeah, exactly. But the focus is on AI as a tool to assist judges with their responsibilities.
So no robot judges just yet, but AI helping with legal research
Mm.
or even drafting opinions. I mean, that's still a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's pretty huge.
So can we talk about who exactly these guidelines are for? I mean, I imagine not every lawyer is going to suddenly have an AI assistant.
You're right. These guidelines are specifically written for U.S. judicial officers.
Okay,
So your judges in both state and federal courts.
gotcha. And just to clarify, we're not just talking about one type of AI here, are we? I feel like every day there's a new buzzword
You're telling
when it comes to this tech.
You got it. The guidelines address both regular AI, which is what we use for analyzing data, making predictions,
Right.
and generative AI or Gen AI, if you want to be cool.
Okay.
And that's the type of AI that can create new content, like text or even images.
Okay, so no robot judges, but an AI that can help write legal documents. That's
Yeah.
pretty wild and maybe a little unnerving,
A
right?
little bit.
Why are these guidelines so important right now?
Well, because AI's impact on the justice system is potentially huge, right? So we need to make sure it's used ethically effectively. That's what the
Yeah.
Sedona Conference is trying to do.
Right.
They're providing this framework so judges can use AI in a way that enhances, not undermines, the core principles of justice.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, to establish some ground rules early on,
It,
especially with something as, well, important as the justice system, right? It's
yeah,
not like we can just hit undo if things go sideways.
exactly.
So what are some of the key areas these guidelines are addressing?
Well, one of the most important things is that AI is meant to be a tool to help judges, not to replace their judgment or their expertise.
Okay.
So the guidelines emphasize that judges are still the ultimate decision makers.
Right.
They still have to use their own discretion, their own evaluation of the information.
So AI is like a really, really advanced research assistant,
Exactly.
not a replacement for the judge's experience and knowledge.
100%. And the guidelines really hammer home that judges still need to understand AI's limitations,
Mm-hmm.
make sure anything AI spits out is carefully checked,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately they're the ones responsible for the decisions they make.
That makes me think about some of the pitfalls, of relying too much on AI.
Sure.
What are some of the risks that these guidelines highlight?
One of the big ones is that, while AI is great at processing tons of data,
Yeah,
it doesn't actually understand things like nuance or context, right?
right. Human would.
As a human would.
Yeah.
So judges got to be aware of that.
So even if an AI can, spit out some legal arguments,
Yeah.
doesn't mean it understands all the nuances of a case or the human impact of a
exactly.
decision. And then another risk is that AI systems are only as good as the data they're trained on, right?
Right.
So if that data reflects existing biases in the system,
Uh-oh.
the AI could just keep repeating those biases, which would obviously be a huge problem. Yeah, that's a big one. It's like saying, hey, AI, learn from all these past cases,
Yeah.
but not realizing that those cases might be full of, unfairness or prejudice.
Exactly. And so the guidelines emphasize how important it is to carefully pick the data
Right.
and constantly be monitoring for bias in the systems.
It sounds like these guidelines are trying to strike this balance, embracing the potential of AI while also making sure it's used responsibly in the courts.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
They want judges to harness the power of AI, but still uphold the principles of fairness, impartiality, due process,
Right.
all those things that are essential to our system.
Right. Okay, so we've established AI as a tool, not a replacement, and we've talked about some risks. I'm curious about the applications. What are some examples of how AI could actually be used in the courtroom?
Well, the guidelines outline a bunch of potential uses,
Okay.
and some of these are already being done in courts.
Oh.
For instance, AI can be amazing for legal research, helping judges go through mountains of case law and statutes way faster than a human could.
Oh, wow. So instead of spending hours in the law library,
Yeah,
they could use AI to quickly find the relevant cases and statutes.
exactly. And legal research can get so complicated, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And there's just so much information out there.
Yeah.
AI can streamline that whole process and let judges focus on the more, I guess, the nuances of a case.
What other tasks could AI help with? Because I imagine there's a ton of paperwork,
Right? There's a ton.
administrative stuff in legal proceedings.
Yeah, and that's another area where AI can be super helpful. Like, it can draft routine orders and documents,
Okay.
like scheduling orders or summonses,
Yeah.
frees up so much time for judges and court staff.
So it's like having a super efficient legal assistant never needs a coffee break.
Exactly. And that kind of AI assistance can make the whole process more efficient, which helps everyone, the judges, the lawyers, even the people involved in the case.
Yeah, and it starts to paint this picture of how AI could really transform the way courts operate.
Hmm.
But I'm sure there are also concerns about how this could change the dynamics in the courtroom itself, right?
Oh, definitely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one concern is that we start relying on AI too much,
Uh-huh.
and the justice system becomes, like, impersonal,
Less human. Yeah.
less human. And that's, you know,
That's kind of a scary thought.
yeah, it is.
People feel like they're being judged by an algorithm, not a human being
Right.
who can, understand their circumstances.
Exactly. And that's why judges got to remember that technology should never replace that human element.
Yeah.
They have to maintain that connection with the people in front of them.
Yeah.
Ensure that everyone feels heard and understood.
Regardless of whether AI is involved or not.
Exactly.
It's a tough balance, isn't it?
It is.
We have this incredible technology that can make the justice system more efficient. But we also have to think about how it affects, like, the human experience of justice.
Absolutely. And the guidelines do mention that, they want to use AI to enhance those fundamental values, fairness, impartiality,
Right.
human dignity, all of that.
Well, I think we've covered a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're really just scratching the surface here.
For sure.
I'm sure our listeners want to dive even deeper into this.
Yeah.
What other applications should we be thinking about as AI becomes more common in the courtroom?
So many. Like, for
Yeah.
example, AI could help analyze evidence and find patterns that people might miss.
Oh, so like a digital detective.
Yes.
Sifting through mountains of data, uncovering hidden clues. That's right out of a crime show.
I know, right?
That's amazing.
And this would be really helpful in complex cases where there's just so much evidence.
Yeah.
It could help make sure all the relevant info is considered.
I can also imagine AI helping people who are representing themselves in court,
Oh, absolutely.
which can be really daunting,
Incredibly daunting.
especially if you're not a lawyer, right? AI could provide some much-needed guidance.
100%. So things like user-friendly tools that explain legal procedures,
Yeah.
help people understand their rights, maybe even help them draft documents.
Wow. That could be a game changer for people who might otherwise feel lost in the system.
Definitely. And it ties into this idea of making justice accessible to everyone,
Right.
no matter their background or resources.
Okay, so AI can help with research, drafting documents, analyzing evidence, even making the courts more accessible.
Yep.
I'm starting to see why these guidelines are so important.
Yeah.
We're talking about a technology that could fundamentally change how justice works.
Exactly. And these guidelines are like the first step, right? To figure out how to use it ethically and responsibly. And AI keeps evolving, so we got to keep talking about it, adapting our approach
Right.
to make sure it helps justice and fairness.
It's clear we're just at the beginning of this whole thing.
First,
There's so much more to learn and explore as AI becomes more common in the courtroom.
definitely.
But we've covered a ton in this first part of our deep dive,
Yeah, we have.
and there's still so much more to unpack, right?
Lots more.
So when we come back, we'll dig deeper into these Sedona Conference guidelines.
Okay.
Look at how AI might change the roles of judges and lawyers in the years to come.
Sounds good. So as we kind of continue this conversation about AI and the justice system, it's important to remember that these guidelines, they're not set in stone.
Right.
They're going to change as the technology changes.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like trying to write the rules for the internet back when we all had dial-up, right?
Exactly. Like, things change way too fast.
Yeah.
And just like, the internet changed the world in so many ways, AI could totally reshape how we approach justice.
So as we think about this, what are some of the biggest concerns that these guidelines try to deal with?
Well, one of the big ones is making sure judges are still doing their jobs, even with AI in the courtroom. The guidelines say AI should never replace a judge's expertise.
Okay.
It's more like a tool to help them.
Right. So it's not like AI versus judges. It's more like AI working with judges.
Working together.
Make things better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they really stress that judges need to understand, like, what AI can and can't do.
Mm-hmm.
They still got to double check everything it spits out.
Right.
And in the end, they're the ones responsible for the decisions.
That makes me think about accountability, you know?
Right.
Like if a judge relies on AI for a decision and it turns out to be wrong,
Yeah.
who takes the blame?
That's a great question. And the guidelines are pretty clear.
Yeah.
The judge is always responsible.
Okay.
Just like they have to, carefully consider what an expert witness says, they got to do the same with AI.
So no pass in the buck like, oh, the AI told me to do it.
Nope. No way.
They still got to use their own judgment.
Exactly.
Make sure the AI's recommendation actually makes sense.
100%. And that's why they talk about training judges on how to use AI properly.
Right, and how to evaluate it.
Yeah, exactly.
This is making me think about, like, the role of judges in general.
Mm-hmm.
How is this all going to change the skills they need to be successful?
It's a really good question. I think we're going to see judges needing to know more about technology, even data science.
Okay.
Like, they got to be able to tell if AI system is reliable, if it's biased, all of that.
That makes sense of all those complex data reports and stuff.
Yeah, it's not just about being a legal expert anymore.
So judges might have to become, like, tech savvy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see more training that combines law and tech.
To get them ready for this new world.
Exactly. And all of this brings up the question of public trust in the justice system.
Yeah, huge question.
How does AI affect that? How do we make sure people still believe in the courts, even with AI involved?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
One big thing is transparency, right?
Okay.
People need to know how AI is being used in their cases.
Right, otherwise it feels like a black box is making decisions.
Exactly. And that just erodes trust.
It's like that saying, justice must not only be done, but must also be seen to be done.
That's it. So we got to make sure AI is being used openly in a way everyone understands.
So judges need to be upfront about it.
Totally.
Explain their decisions in plain language.
Yeah, not just legal jargon.
So everyone can follow along.
Exactly. Transparency and education, those are key for maintaining trust.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the actual ways AI is being used.
Okay.
You mentioned legal research. Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so there are these AI platforms that can analyze tons of case law, statutes, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They can quickly find relevant precedents and arguments.
Oh, wow. So they're saving lawyers and judges a ton of time.
Tons of time. It's like having a superpowered research assistant.
Right, sifting through all those documents.
And they're getting better all the time.
How so?
Well, they use natural language processing and machine learning to really understand, like, the nuances of legal language
Oh, wow.
and give super specific results.
So judges can cut through the noise and get right to what matters.
Exactly. It's especially helpful in complex cases where there are just layers and layers of arguments.
Makes sense. We also talked about AI helping with routine documents, like the paperwork side of things.
Yeah, that's another area where it's already being used.
Any examples?
Sure, AI can automate things like contracts, wills, even basic court filings.
Wow.
It uses templates and algorithms to create documents for specific situations.
So lawyers don't have to start from scratch every time.
Exactly. And it can really help solo practitioners or small firms.
Who might not have a lot of staff.
Exactly. It's like a legal writing assistant.
Taking care of the more tedious stuff.
Yeah, so lawyers can focus on the bigger picture.
I can also see AI helping with court schedules, making things more efficient.
Absolutely. Some courts are already using AI to optimize their schedules.
How does that work?
It looks at things like which judges are available, how complex the cases are, attorney schedules,
Okay.
and it tries to find the best times for everything.
So less delays, less conflicts.
Right. And it could really help with the backlog of cases.
Yeah, that's a big problem in a lot of courts.
Huge problem.
Yeah.
And by making things more efficient, we could save money, reduce delays, and just make things better for everyone.
Okay, so we've got legal research, document drafting, scheduling.
Mm-hmm.
Where else could AI make a difference in the justice system?
Well, one area that's getting a lot of attention is using AI to analyze evidence
Okay.
and maybe even find patterns that humans would miss.
That's like the digital detective we were talking about.
Exactly. It could be huge and complex cases with tons of evidence, like financial fraud or cybercrime.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Imagine a case where someone's cooking the books with thousands of transactions.
Oh, yeah.
AI could analyze all of that,
Mm.
look for suspicious stuff.
Flag things for investigators to look at more closely.
Exactly. It's like a super-powered forensic accountant.
Right. Spotting those tiny details.
And it could help investigators build stronger cases, find key evidence.
Ultimately, get justice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about jury selection?
Ooh, interesting. How could AI play a role there?
Well, some people are talking about using AI to spot potential biases in jurors.
Based on their online activity, that kind of thing?
Yeah, but there are definitely ethical concerns there.
Right, like privacy issues?
Exactly. We got to make sure we're not creating new forms of bias.
Or violating people's rights.
Exactly. The guidelines talk about this too, about using AI fairly in jury selection.
It seems like every use of AI has both good and bad sides.
For sure.
It's all about finding the right balance
Yeah.
and making sure we use this technology the right way.
100%. It's not about just using AI because it's cool. We got to think about the consequences.
So carefully evaluating each application,
Well,
weighing the pros and cons,
Yeah.
making sure it actually helps with justice.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
From the big ideas in the Sedona Conference guidelines
Yeah.
to specific ways AI is being used in the courts.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this part of our conversation, I'm curious about the bigger picture.
Okay.
Where do you see this all going in the next few years?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think AI is going to be more and more integrated into every part of the legal system.
Okay.
From research and writing documents to analyzing evidence, even helping judges make decisions.
So AI is not just a fad,
Nope, it's here to stay.
and it's going to change how justice works.
I think so, yeah. And as we move forward, we really need to keep talking about the ethical side of things.
Right, that's huge.
Like, how do we make sure AI is used to make things fairer, to give everyone access to justice, and to protect people's rights?
Because we've seen AI used for good,
Uh-huh.
but we've also seen it used in ways that are, not so good.
Exactly.
And we need to learn from both.
100%. We got to be aware of things like bias, discrimination, even threats to privacy.
As we brought AI into the courtroom,
Yeah, and we need safeguards, oversight, all of that.
to make sure it's used the right way.
Exactly.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to do
There is.
to make sure AI fulfills its potential without, messing things up.
You got it. It's about being thoughtful, ethical, and always adapting as the technology changes.
And that leads perfectly into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll explore some of the deeper ethical and societal questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into AI in the courts, let's zoom out a bit.
Great.
We've talked about, the good stuff, the potential problems, the need for guidelines. But this all comes down to one big question, right? What does AI in the courtroom mean for justice itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to focus on the techie stuff, but we can't forget about, the human side.
Right.
What does it mean for people who are looking for justice, for lawyers, for society as a whole?
You mentioned before that too much reliance on AI could lead to a less human-centered justice system.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that?
Sure. Imagine, a world where legal decisions are mostly made by algorithms,
Okay.
where your individual circumstances don't really matter anymore.
Wow.
That's kind of scary, right? We got to be careful about that.
It's easy to imagine someone feeling like they're talking to a computer, not a judge,
Exactly.
who can, listen and understand and be compassionate.
That's a real concern. And it shows why AI should be used to help human judgment, not replace it entirely.
Right.
Justice isn't just about following the law. It's about fairness, empathy, all of that.
So it's not just about the AI being accurate. It's about it being used in a way that's, ethical,
Yeah.
aligned with our values. Yep.
Exactly. And that means thinking about the ethics of every single way we use AI in the courtroom.
So what are some of the biggest ethical questions we should be asking ourselves right now?
Well, one of the most important ones is, how do we make sure AI doesn't just repeat the biases that already exist in the system?
Right, because we've talked about how biased data can lead to biased outcomes.
Exactly. And we got to be super careful about that.
Yeah.
It's like, if you train an AI on bad data, you're just going to get bad results.
Yeah, it's like garbage in, garbage out, right?
Exactly. So we got to be intentional about the data we use
Right.
and constantly check for bias in the AI systems.
Another big question is transparency.
Huge one.
How do we make sure the use of AI is open and accountable
Yeah, so people know how decisions are being made.
and can challenge them if they need to?
Exactly. It's not enough to just say, Trust us, the AI's got this.
Right. You got to be able to explain it in a way that everyone understands.
100%. And that brings up the need for regulations, oversight.
Yeah.
We need rules for how AI can be used in the courts
Right.
and ways to hold people accountable if they don't follow those rules.
It feels like we're still figuring all this out.
We are, definitely.
There's so much we don't know yet, and the technology's changing so fast.
It's true. But that's also what makes it so interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have this chance to shape how AI is used in the courts.
And we got to do it right.
We got to do it right with ethics and careful consideration.
So what does all this mean for lawyers and judges?
Good question. I think we're going to see a big shift in the skills they need.
Okay.
Some of the stuff lawyers do now, like research and writing documents, might be automated, right?
But I don't think that means lawyers are going away.
No, not at all. They'll just focus on more complex stuff.
The stuff that requires, like, human judgment.
Yeah, creativity, strategy.
So lawyers will need to learn how to work with AI.
Uh-huh.
Understand what it can and can't do.
Exactly. And judges will need to learn more about technology and data.
So they can make sure it's used fairly.
100%. The whole legal profession is about to change in a big way.
Yeah, it really feels like it.
Law schools will have to teach this stuff.
Yeah.
Lawyers and judges will have to keep learning throughout their careers.
Okay, we've talked about a lot today.
We have.
And it's clear that AI in the courts is, well, complicated.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
As we finish up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay. Sure.
As AI becomes more common in the courts, we have to be really careful about how it affects justice, fairness, human dignity.
Yeah.
We got to ask ourselves, how can we make sure it benefits everyone, not just a few?
Right.
How do we prevent it from being used to, like, increase inequality?
Big question.
And how do we make sure the human element of justice doesn't disappear?
Those are the right questions. And the answers aren't easy. They'll probably change as the technology changes.
Right.
But it's a conversation we need to have as a society if we want to make sure AI is used for good.
Absolutely. And with that, we'll leave it to our listeners to keep thinking about these questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into AI in the justice system.